So let's get started. Good afternoon, maybe good morning. I doubt good evening though. But I wanted to get us started thinking a little bit about math instruction when it comes to blended learning. And yeah, blended learning definitely much more personalized, allows the individual to work at their own pace. There's a lot of elements when it comes to math instruction that's drill and practice. But before we get started there, I wanted to kind of review a little bit about the major attributes when it comes to an individual that struggles with math, maybe has an actual identified math disability. And we'll focus more on elements that potentially, not necessarily disability identified, but at least a learning challenge when it comes to math. And understanding those attributes to me are critical as we get into then considering the features and supports that are potentially built into the personalized learning or the fully online learning or the blended learning that we're using. So with that, let's get started with thinking about kind of overall issues that deal with individuals that struggle and math and what this means. And again, a variety of things we're going to talk about. But kind of get started, part of all, I want to think about this term dyscalculia. And dyscalculia is a challenge that a number of individuals face that have identified learning disabilities, that have a learning disability that potentially is not identified but seen as a learning challenge, that may be seen as a little bit slow, maybe seen actually as unmotivated, maybe someone that seems to be kind of lazy. And yet what we find is a lot of these individuals, right from the get-go, they have difficulty with making sense of numbers, math concepts, language of math, and there's a variety of other elements. But what we do know, it's definitely brain-based. It's part of who the kind of genetic makeup of the individual, and it's not something that they're going to necessarily grow out of. But we can, with the right types of supports, really address some of their needs. Now, overall, as I mentioned, it's definitely brain-based. If you want to think of it in terms of language, it's a difficulty with the language of numbers. So number sense is distorted, they're challenged, there's lack of conceptualization of numbers and what they mean, the visualization of numbers in terms of the mental number line that many of us use, that's not going to happen, or potentially the idea of estimation and the connection there. They'll have difficulty with measurement, area, approximation of time, manipulating money, but manipulating numbers, working with numbers, and we're talking about beyond addition. We're talking about elements of grouping numbers, fractions, decimals, patterns, counting by twos, counting by fives, sequencing of numbers. And then you get into the spatial relationships of reading maps, reading graphics, elements of understanding what the actual data says. The left to right of reading of information or lack thereof, formulating or following formulas, utilizing strategies that we are teaching to sort, concentration and being able to tie that in, bringing something to memory and then retrieving that memory. These are all issues of an individual with this type of challenge. Now, when we think of this, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's going to be, yes, lack of number sense, but it could also be, of course, associated with word problems. Interpreting our math symbols, which are so critical, or math symbols that we're supposed to learn to then bring as part of a formula, will become further challenged. And of course, basic and advanced computation, the formulas that we're supposed to follow, the steps we're supposed to follow, the sequence we're supposed to follow, how we're supposed to actually align it up, step by step, potentially missing steps due to lack of concentration, but also in terms of how we're conceptualizing things or the formulas we're supposed to follow, and the fact that we may not be able to get it down to memory because of our lack of understanding, and then of course we have the memory issue as well. So a lot of different things going on. And this visual here to me just kind of offers a general overview of a lot of the difficulties facing an individual with this type of challenge. One of the things I want to point out, in addition to what we've already talked about, is that recognizing patterns, but also the size, color, shapes, the listing goes on, but also the fact that, this real life application, this generalization, and as we know, a lot of math today is being reinforced to, we need to apply it to today. We need to apply it to the real world. Well, that's a bit of a generalization. And we know a lot of these individuals will have difficulty generalizing. So what we think might be a positive to make a connection to that real world may very well be an additional challenge in addition to the visual things we have here. And then I can't emphasize enough, because this is going to be something I'll mention here in a slide or two, this idea of reading the graph, understanding the graph, comprehending the graph, and applying that information to the actual potential formula we're trying to do, or the math aspects we're trying to do in addition to that graph, is going to be a challenge. And so we need to realize that and plan for that. Now, if we think of kind of common pitfalls, we think of a lot of the lessons that we do online. A lot of it is drill and skill. A lot of it is drill, and then we'll do practice with skill, and then we'll have the lesson, we'll have the student work through the lesson. We may offer a visual of where they went wrong, but often where they went wrong and what is offered within the blended learning context is not enough. And what I mean by that is they'll generally say, well, okay, so you made this mistake, this is what you should have done, but it's not really getting into, wait a minute here, this is a concept we're trying to teach. This is a breakdown of what we're trying to teach, and let's kind of review that again. And you may say, well, that's taking you back to the lesson, Sean, and we just finished the lesson, and did they not understand it? Well, hopefully, in some of the good blended learning elements, you'll actually bring it back to that concept of the lesson that question is revolving around. And instead of just simply saying, you're wrong, here's the right answer, and by the way, this is how the formula should have looked, or this is the process should have looked, they may bring you back to that reminder of this is what we're trying to instruct, and here's an example of what we're trying to instruct, to kind of bring that back to that reinforcement. Oftentimes, this drill and skill or drill and kill is a barrier. And that's an element we need to realize, and we need to potentially color code the steps. We need to potentially visually organize the information. We potentially, as I mentioned a moment ago, introduce the strategy within the context of the mistake and move on from there. Now, some of you may be saying, Sean, this sounds a little bit about dyslexia. And there's actually elements of what you tend to think about dyslexia in terms of, wait, I shift letters. A Q turns into a P, a B turns into a P. A B turns into a D, things of that nature, or things are all sorted out. Well, in a way, that's kind of what's happening with math, as I mentioned, the lack of number sense, the concept of 5 is before, 5 is after 3, and 5 is before 7, things of that nature. Hard to connect with letters, symbols, things of that nature, and so those are all elements to consider that we're dealing with in terms of this math challenge. And of course, dyslexia has lots of different issues. One of the things I want to reinforce here with dyslexia for kind of that connection here is the fact that dyslexia has memory difficulties. There's a spatial temporal component in terms of getting lost easily. Think of that in terms of our more complicated math formulas. There's definitely a reading component, and word problems are definitely an element of math, and actually math has become very language-based. And so the idea of lack of comprehension and connection. There's definitely a listening component in terms of not potentially able to take note. And we think of a lot of the ways we instruct math. There's definitely an auditory component and a listening component. So there's a lot of different things going on there. And of course, as I said, the memory in terms of sequences and tables and things of that nature. So a lot of different things going on here in dyslexia that has elements in terms of math difficulties. So let's take this a little bit further, all right, in terms of, first of all, visual processing. So the vision is not the problem here, folks, but rather the processing and interpreting of visual information. As I mentioned before, understand what's there in terms of graphing, but also discriminating in terms of the sequence, the visual component, the steps, the perception of all that, all will become a challenge when it comes to an individual with this type of disability when it comes to math. Now let's give some examples. So for example, let's say we're doing some math calculations that require numbers and symbols apart. So the individual may not recognize the difference between an addition, subtraction, multiplication, the difference between 9 and 6, but then let's kind of amplify that with a variety of different numbers that they're not necessarily connecting with. So we expect that they understand patterns. Sorry. We expect that they'll line up math problems and interpret the graphs and charts. Sorry, not going to happen. We're going to need to be much more intensive here, much more specific. So for example, look at a formula like this, where they'll need to recognize the patterns, they'll need to line up the math problems, they'll need to interpret that information. Very difficult for the individual with this type of disability. We talked about graphs, talked about recognizing patterns, talked about lining up the math problem and interpreting the graph and chart, talked about the challenge with left to right reading and vice versa, talked about information about plotting information, understanding the significance of what is plotted and how to read that information and make that connection back to a formula. This becomes a reading task, this becomes a sequencing task. There's so much involved here that becomes a challenge for the individual when it comes to the graphic element, especially when we're actually supposed to use the graph in connecting to what we're actually supposed to then solve. Or the graph being seen as, well, this is a visual representation. This will help the individual in terms of then the formulaic component that follows, and that actually is an incorrect assumption with the individuals we're talking about. So here's another example. So we make calculation errors due to ignoring the functions or the signs. We're confusing similar things. While our spacing during the lesson and the features are incorrect. We make errors due to misaligned columns and numbers. So part of it is to restructure that, part of it is to organize it, part of it is to columnize it, part of it is to color code it, and I'll get ahead of myself with the strategies. But the idea is this is where the visual processing will continue with math errors. Now finally, to kind of further contextualize this, there are some good examples under a site called Understood. This is a young lady, Jade, and Jade is basically, in this instance, talking to you about some of her reading challenges, but I'm going to connect you to some videos where the individuals will kind of talk to you about their perspective when it comes to these challenges we just mentioned. And they're very realistic, they're very heartfelt, and I'd ask you to kind of make that connection between what it is that we are expecting of the individual and what the individual brings to the math instruction, and how those disconnects could very possibly lead to some significant challenges that we'll see in a variety of different ways. We may not be able to connect the dots, but this is where we need to understand this background information to have more of a reflection to then potentially connect the dots.